Look closely at the floor of St. Peter's Basilica. Every day, millions of tourists walk across this vast stretch of marble, completely unaware that a martyred vicar of Christ lies buried right beneath their feet. His name was John. 250 years of popes had come before him, yet he was the very first to bear that name. He wore the golden vestments of the supreme pontiff, but his reign ended in the silence of a forgotten dungeon, wrapped in iron chains. Rome elected a frail, elderly deacon. His physical health was already failing. His primary devotion as a priest had been quiet and pastoral, restoring the desecrated graves of the early Christian martyrs and adorning their tombs with precious stones. He inherited a church bleeding from the Arian heresy. Arianism taught that the Son was not God, but merely a creature. To accept it was to deny the true divinity of Jesus Christ. The Apostle Paul writes, "My power is made perfect in weakness." Heaven intentionally chose this trembling, sick old man to defend the central truth of the creed against the swords of worldly empires. Italy lay firmly under the control of King Theodoric. He was an Ostrogoth, a brilliant military commander, and a fiercely devoted Arian heretic. He ruled by force, and he tolerated no challenge to his power. The crisis ignited when the Catholic Emperor Justin, ruling from Constantinople, issued a severe edict. He commanded the Arians to surrender their churches and stripped them of all public office. Theodoric was enraged. He summoned the elderly pope and issued a brutal ultimatum. John was to march across a freezing winter road to Constantinople and demand that the Catholic emperor revoke his decree. This was a perfectly engineered spiritual trap. If John convinced the emperor to yield, he would betray the Catholic faith and favor heresy. If he refused, Theodoric promised massive, violent reprisals against the Catholics of Western Europe. No pope in history had ever traveled to the Eastern Empire. John packed his things and began the journey. He knew he was walking toward a guaranteed martyrdom, because no successor of Peter could ever negotiate away the creed. The grueling winter road broke the old man's body. By the time the embassy reached Corinth, John lacked the strength to continue on foot. A local noblewoman lent the exhausted pope her personal, highly trained riding horse to carry him to the next town. When the horse was returned to its owner, it violently threw off the noblewoman. The irrational beast refused to let anyone else upon its back. Having carried the vicar of Christ, the animal recognized the divine authority that humans so often ignore. The arrival at Constantinople was staggering. Emperor Justin did not wait in his palace. He marched 12 miles outside the city walls, prostrated himself in the dirt, and kissed the Pope's feet. As the vast imperial procession approached the Golden Gate, a blind man cried out from the dense crowd. Pope John approached him, laid his hands upon the man's eyes, and his sight was instantly restored. These were genuine, public acts of God. Heaven orchestrated them to prove to the entire Eastern Empire that this fragile old man spoke with the absolute, unquestionable authority of Jesus Christ. On Easter Sunday, John reached the absolute height of papal glory. He celebrated the solemn Latin Mass at the altar of the Hagia Sophia, and with his own hands, he placed the imperial crown onto the head of Emperor Justin. Justin granted many concessions to ease the tension in Italy, but John flatly refused to ask the emperor to return converted Catholics back to the Arian heresy. He fulfilled the diplomatic journey, but he defied the Arian king. Theodoric was waiting for him. Paranoid and furious at the Pope's triumphant reception in the East, the king ordered John arrested the moment he landed in Ravenna. The exhausted pontiff was dragged into a pitch-black cell. Days before, those hands had been kissed by an emperor. They had restored sight to the blind. Now, those exact same hands reach through the cold iron bars, grasping for a meal that will never come. The ancient Roman records describe his death with 3 terrible words: fame et squalore confectus, worn out by hunger and squalor. Heaven knows no difference between the swift strike of the gladiator's sword and the slow, agonizing attrition of starvation. Both are the chalice of Christ. Pope John died in his chains on May 18, 526. God did not let his murder go unanswered. Barely 3 months later, Theodoric died. A hermit on the Isle of Lipari witnessed a terrifying vision: the soul of the king, stripped of his crown, being cast into the volcanic fires of Mount Etna by the very martyrs he had killed. King Theodoric is dead, but his heresy survives. Our modern culture harbors its own Arianisms. It constantly pressures believers to dilute the gospel, to treat Jesus merely as a good moral teacher, and to whisper his divinity instead of proclaiming it. Most of us will never face an executioner, but we will face a hidden martyrdom, a compromised career, a broken relationship, or quiet social exile, simply because we refuse to bend the Catholic faith to fit the times. Pope St. John I is the patron saint of those small hours. He is the intercessor for every believer who is asked, without any audience or applause, to be a silent victim for Christ. St. John I, Pope and Martyr, who chose Christ over Caesar, who died in chains for the divinity of the Word, pray for us. In our small daily trials, in our hidden martyrdoms, in the moment the world asks us to bend, Pope St. John I, pray for us.